Yum, yum!
Greg here from Pixel Fondue. So this video is going to be a little bit different than normal. I'm sitting here in front of my Mac Studio, which I got a while ago, but I just haven't had much time to use. I did just update to OS 27 Golden Gate, so it's in development right now. I have a developer account, so I installed the beta. I don't believe it's the public has access to it yet, but I'm making this video because it has some really interesting stuff regarding OpenUSD. So this channel is geared towards 3D professionals. If you find yourself here, just real quick, OpenUSD is a universal scene description. So essentially in the 3D world, we have big complicated 3D scenes with lights and cameras and images and textures, materials, geometry, animation, all kinds of stuff. And every application has their own proprietary format for that scene, and that's been the way it's been for a very long time, 30 years or so. There's been various attempts to sort of make a universal format. So think of like, any program can open up a JPEG or a PNG, right? It's not so easy with 3D because these files are very complicated. But this was an effort put forth by Pixar, and it's backed by Nvidia and a lot of other big players. And now Apple seems to have incorporated it just straight into the operating system. So it's really interesting that Apple's preview, the thing you use to look at PDFs and print them out or scan something, has not just a OpenUSD viewer, but a full-blown USD scene editor built into preview. Now, this is not a full-blown DCC like Cinema 4D or Houdini or something, or Blender, but it's pretty shocking what it can do. And the fact that it's built into just the OS and is available on whatever 100 million Macs or whatever many there are out there that will be on this operating system on day one is pretty striking. And it gives me hope that maybe we're actually going to achieve the sort of dream of OpenUSD and make a universal scene that can be, imported and exported by all these different programs. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean it'll be the sort of scene you work with all the time, but it gives a lot of hope in this area for building a pipeline around this sort of standard scene format, and also just being able to view other people's scenes and import them and have them work. If you have somebody who's working in Houdini or Blender, being able to import their scene essentially in a USD friendly format and being able to manipulate it or understand what's on there is it's super big news for our industry. And Apple is like throwing their weight behind this, I think is worthy of this sort of video. So if, this is a document from Nvidia or website from Nvidia, which I will post in the description below. It talks about what OpenUSD is. It actually has this cool sort of interactive glossary where you can zoom in on this flowchart and sort of click on things if you want more about instancing or models and the model hierarchy, whatever. There's just, there's just a lot in here. So variants are interesting. Variants are really interesting. And I should talk more about this, but a variant is something where you can have multiple, it's kind of like you think of, you can have multiple versions of essentially anything in a scene, multiple versions of geometry, multiple versions of animation, multiple versions of materials, multiple versions of lights or cameras. So variants are something that if this USD format becomes more widely used, I think people will be using this feature a lot. Anyway, so this is a whole other thing. So I'm not going to get into the whole thing with USD. I'm just going to show some examples of what Preview can do with an OpenUSD scene. So what I did is I just downloaded some USD files from Sketchfab. Sketchfab is a really nice 3D repository site where people can just put up models for free with Creative Commons attributions or licenses, and also can sell models if they want. In fact, I think Epic bought them and probably integrated it into their, not so great Epic store or whatever. But it has all kinds of great USD files if you just want to play with this and check it out. So now we all know Quick Look, right? You just press space and you kind of look at a file. This is a USDZ file, and the Z on USDZ just means like zipped or archived. It means it takes all the images and everything else and puts it into one file and just compresses it together. So you don't have separate, images as separate files. It just makes it easier. And you can see how it just kind of throws it in there. You can preview these. Now, previewing 3D files with hitting spacebar and quick click. Here's a full-blown animation, just previewing. This is a USD scene I got from Sketchfab. And you can rotate around in here too as well. I don't think you can pan and zoom. No, maybe you can. Maybe mouse button seems to do something. Now, this is not unheard of. I think they had FBX and US or OBJ and probably some other just quick look files, quick look plugins for 3D geometry. So what's interesting is when you bring this into preview. So this is the statue of the god Sobek, which is I think a scan from an Egyptian statue. It's pretty big, 16 megs, so I think it's a couple 100,000 polygons at least. Okay, why don't we take a look at this robot toy first and just kind of get a feel of what you can do with preview in a USD scene. So here we are in preview. We've got a toolbar up here, and we've got some additional tools over here, which we'll talk about in a minute. And yeah, let's just start with the basics. Navigation. So left mouse rotate, right mouse up, down is zoom, middle mouse is pan, and then of course you've got a scroll wheel. You can zoom with it. And I'm actually just going to go up real quick here to this little light icon. We've got some basic sort of scene lighting presets. I'm going to go to sunny, a little bit nicer looking there, I think, than the studio one with our robot. And then let's just sort of continue on just sort of the basics. So we've got navigation, which is essentially Maya navigation without the Alt key. And that it tells me that these guys behind this are familiar with just the standard tools we use in 3D production, because Alt-Nav is sort of the Maya standard Alt-Nav is available in all programs. Even if it's not the default, it's usually available. So let me pop open the object hierarchy over on the side. So here's our USD scene hierarchy right here. We've got materials, and we've got meshes. And so you see these little axes here. These are just null objects or locators. And I can just hold option. Is it option? I'm not a Mac guy so much, but hold option and you can just get the whole, just unfold them all at once. And you've got the robot down here at the bottom. Now, when it's selected, you see this little blue bounding box here. So we know it's selected. There's a little, cube next to the robot. So we know it's a mesh. And there's a little gear icon here, which will give the properties. So this will give properties of lights or cameras or materials. If I select the material, we're going to have a sort of PBR, physically based rendering material properties that we're all familiar with. We've got a metallic slider, roughness, clear coat, all that, refractive index, emissive color. So it's all kind of there. Displacement is there as well. Kind of surprisingly, that's exposed, but it is a USD scene. And so there's going to be a limitation of what we can access in the scene within preview, because it's not a full-blown DCC, but the amount you can do in here is pretty shocking. So let's just kind of move on. So I've got my robot selected, and you can see the transforms here. And if you look here, I've got my move, rotate, and scale tools. So I can just select move, and I've got my typical move, handles here. You can see the translations moving. I even have planar handles. Nice touch. And again, these are just standard handles we're used to. And if I hold option again and go to E, that's rotate, and R is scale, and W is move, WER. So that's just, again, sort of standard, we'll just call it Maya keyboard shortcuts, even though, I'll say Maya because it started with Maya, but it's proliferated to all the other 3D programs. So even in Blender, you can pick sort of the standard layout, and it's as close as we have to sort of like an industry standard, right? Alt-Nav, Maya style, and then the sort of Maya style keyboard shortcuts for the transformations. Cinema 4D, they moved over one to the right. But, it's interesting that, for a USD editor, USD being sort of a universal scene format, we're going with navigation and transformation shortcuts that are as universal as they can get. And that tells me, again, that the people who put this together for Apple are familiar with our industry, the tools that we use, and just sort of the default shortcuts and navigation, transformation, and things you do most in 3D. that we sort of expect. And we have tool handles that look like we'd expect and just kind of feels like a DCC, right? We have a properties, attributes panel like you would see in Maya or Cinema or Houdini or Blender on the right-hand side. And it just feels familiar, which is great. So up here, we've got some other stuff. We've got some primitives, right? We've got some cubes and cones and planes, which we'll get to in a second. We've got some cameras and we've got some lights and we've got some annotations, which is interesting. So I think I just maybe added one here. Quick annotation. And here we've got an annotation. So I can just sort of fix this anywhere and it just sort of sticks in 3D. So I could stick it to his hand here like that. And it's just sort of stuck there. I can double click it and I can say, make this arm red or something like that. Cool, got an annotation, and it'll save with the scene file. So what's interesting though is when I've loaded this back into both Blender and Cinema 4D, and while there was a locator for the annotation, there was no text for it. So I'm not sure how that metadata of the text can stay in the USD file. And again, this is going to be like, this is sort of the whole point of this. Like, so if Apple gets behind USD, puts it in preview, and it's available to whatever 50 million Mac users just by default, then it's a USD standard sort of file checker that everything can test against. So if this annotation isn't working in Cinema 4D or Blender, as long as this annotation node is, again, remember the nodes we have in the USD scene files, right? So as long as this node is part of, our USD, standard USD file format, other applications can make sure it works with their USD importer exporter. And this is where it becomes important, where we have a place where we can test all the USD imports and exports to make sure all the materials are importing and exporting correctly, all of the geometry, all of the animation, everything that's within that massive US scene spec we can test to make sure it works. And if it works with preview, and Apple stays on top of this and make sure preview is the sort of the gold standard of the USD spec, then these other applications can test against preview and make sure their importers and exporters work, and maybe we can actually start to share data between different applications reliably. This is the exciting part to me. Not necessarily updating stuff within preview, which is good, which is fun, which I will show you, but just the idea that maybe this will help USD become the thing it's supposed to become. So let's play around with our scene a little bit. Let's add a primitive maybe. How about a ground plane? So I can just click the ground plane and there it is. Now here's where I get to my first criticism. This scene is built on centimeters, which is fine. Like Maya starts in centimeters, Cinema 4D is sort of centimeters. The problem is the primitive, two things. It comes in as centimeters, so I think it's literally the size is 1 centimeter, which is tiny. And the reason it looks big is because it's super close to the camera. If you look at the translation attributes, it's actually 2 meters on X from the origin, 4 on Y, right? And 15 on Z. So it's really far from the origin and it's tiny. It's a centimeter, which means if I just click and drag to navigate, it's going to vanish immediately because it just goes right out of my line of sight of the camera. So I need to put this back at 0, and I don't really understand why they don't spawn these in the center of the scene. Also, just because the scene is a centimeter's scale doesn't mean you should put the primitives as 1 centimeter. That's not useful to anybody. A centimeter is like your thumbnail, right? So make them bigger, make it standard. I think in Cinema 4D it's 200 centimeters for a standard primitive. Same thing with area lights. It'll make a 1 centimeter area light. That's not useful to anybody. They need to change that and sort of again, align themselves with the DCCs we're used to and that sort of default scale we're used to there, because scale is a weird thing. Like if you download something from the internet, like this robot, I have no idea how big the robot scene is, scale is, until I bring it into Blender or Cinema 4D or something and look at it and get the actual scale. It doesn't, this isn't super useful in terms of telling me how big this is. So, okay, so we've got a primitive plane now. We just made it 100 meters. I don't think we need 100 meters. Maybe 10. And we just set it, right underneath his feet. So you can move it up and down with our manipulator there. And, we can give it a color. We'll just maybe make it like an orange, like that. And I'm just going to pull out a little bit, and I'm going to close that. Okay, so we've added a primitive plane to the scene. What about cameras? Why don't we add a camera? So I'm just going to add a camera. I'm going to see it over here, the hierarchy. And you'll also notice that I've got a cameras option under the sidebar. So this gets a little bit weird. Here's my notes, right? Here's my make this arm red annotation. Let's take a look at my camera. So we've got perspective is just your scene camera. And then our camera is the one we added. So let's select that and unlock it and sort of rotate it. And you'll see it changing over here. So I can add, let's zoom in to like his head. So I can add different cameras to the scene and different, and lock in different views, right? So again, it uses something similar to like cursor navigation in Cinema 4D, where if I click over the robot's head, it's going to fire out a ray over his head and use that as sort of a rotation point, I believe, versus like a trackball or center rotation mode. I could be wrong, but that's kind of what it feels like. Anyway, we're just going to kind of go in and navigate like this, and then we've got this camera. I'm going to lock it off. We're going to go back to perspective, and here's our scene camera, right? Hey, Cinema 4D, why don't you give us a perspective view, not just like a camera view? That just side rant on this. Okay. All right, so we can go back to the sidebar here like this, and we've got a camera in the scene, and we've got a primitive in the scene. What else can we do to this scene? Why don't we adjust the rendering, right? So these three little sliders here, I'm going to click that, and you're going to see the rendering options. So this is kind of where it gets interesting. So we have a default renderer called Reality Kit. Now, I believe this is just the Metal. I think the Metal is like sort of Apple's OpenGL API, I suppose, or engine that is running this, that is basically reading this USD scene and reading the materials and geometry and rendering it for us. We also have OpenUSD Storm. If I click that, slightly changed everything, right? So I go again to Reality Kit, and Storm, slightly different. Especially look at the reflections and up on his head, right? Very metallic looking robot. Very different looking robot. So there's a difference between these two, and I don't know if they're going to try to equalize them. OpenUSD Storm, I believe, is the Pixar Hydra-based renderer that they made just to view, USD files. So that should be the sort of, I think, ground truth of the USD scene, even though it's not the default renderer. And then we have what's Ray Tracer. So here it gets, again, this gets a little bit weird. So I'm going to click Ray Tracer, and it's going to turn on, and you probably saw a slight change in the scene here. It's a little bit chunkier. It sort of goes into this like chunky preview mode of an interactive renderer. If you use any sort of interactive IPR renderer, you're familiar with this, where it sort of gets all chunky like that. So, and then you let go, and samples increase, and it sort of smooths out. But I don't think there's any global illumination going on here. Now, if you see up here, there's this little picture that says photoreal rendering on the tooltip. Now, if I click this, then the ray tracer goes into sort of full mode versus preview mode and incorporates global illumination. So I'm going to click this, and I'm going to get a warning. It says, no lights are detected in the scene. Photoreal rendering may appear very dark. Do you want to enable it? So before I hit enable, I'm just going to cancel out of this. Remember, we've got these sort of basic, studio lighting and overcast lighting and sunny lighting, etc. here. I don't believe this is HDR based. I think it's just sort of a basic image-based lighting here. I'm not sure if it's even image-based. It may be just a bunch of directional lights sampled off an image. I'm not sure how they're doing this, but those aren't available in the full-blown ray-traced renderer. If I go into quality mode, it's going to ignore these. In fact, if I click this and hit enable, this is now ghosted out and everything goes black. And so we need an HDR to light the scene. So under the lights here, you'll see we've got various lights. We've got area lights and disk lights and point lights and distant lights, like we're all used to, like a sun. Cylinder lights. We also have a dome light. So I'm going to click the dome light, and it's going to ask me for an HDR. So I'm just going to go to my project server here, European holiday. Okay, so let's pick one from some grayscale Gorilla pack I bought a long time ago. European holiday sounds festive. So these are big. I think they're 8K. So I'm going to open that. It's going to initialize the renderer. And yeah, here we go. We've got our dome light in here. And again, we can take our properties and we can look at our scene here, our object hierarchy. And here's our dome light. We've got a intensity multiplier, so I can bring this up to like 3 or something. Maybe that's too much, maybe 2. And yeah, we've got some image-based lighting and global illumination going on with our robot here. So now this is the part with materials. Let's just select the robot material where I think there's still some work to be done. So we've got sort of an open PBR material layout here, something that I would be familiar with. We have a texture on the diffuse color. This is the texture of the robot that came with it. It's just a UV map texture. As far as I understand, the only texture mapping this supports is UV mapping. It doesn't support triplanar or anything like that. Not yet, at least. So you cannot just come in here and just start throwing out triplanar textures on everything. But who knows? Maybe they'll add that. I don't know. But let's take a look at use specular workflow. We've got a 1 here, and if I go here and put a 0, it looks significantly different. In fact, this may look a little more like I would expect. And so let's take a look at this metallic slider here. So I crank out the metallic slider on the robot. It's looking much more metallic. And if I crank it down, it's looking less metallic. That's, again, what I would expect. So this seems to be a metallic slider using the diffuse texture to basically replace the diffuse color with the specular color, right? And so I think that's what this specular workflow would be, where the diffuse color, if metallic is at 100, it's going to completely overtake the specular color channel, just like a typical PBR workflow would. And if I go back down to 0 here, so if I go back to the specular workflow of 1 and I turn up metallic, I'm not getting, it looks metallic, but I think it's using the specular color here, which is probably just a grayscale map for the metallic reflection. What we wanted to do when metallic is turned up to 100 is to use the colors and the diffuse color map. And that's typically how the more modern specular workflow goes. And so I'm not sure if these are sort of experimental features, because I don't know why you would know to change this to 0 or 1, why they're not named something like legacy or, diffuse metallic or something like that. I don't know. But that's the way it is. And so I'm just going to crank up metallic again. I do think there's just some work that needs to be done. If I crank up roughness, this should look a little less, the specular highlight should spread out, which it's doing. And if I turn it down, it's a lot tighter, right? So that seems to be working. And I should be able to crank up some clear coat here as well, maybe. I think, is that working? Maybe, I don't know. Probably not a lot of roughness on that. At any rate, I think the materials are probably still a bit of a work in progress at this point. Again, this is beta software, so this is just the developer version of Golden Gate, so this hasn't been released yet. My guess is they need some more work on the material properties. But there we have it. And in terms of materials, what's interesting is I don't know how to create a new material, but you can certainly copy a material by, I believe, just pressing or anything by holding Option and dragging. And you can duplicate the materials. So I just duplicated this one. So let's just I'm just going to hold click to rename this. We'll call this floor. And then on our plane, I'm going to bring up my properties. And under material, I'm going to select floor. And now it's using essentially that robot material we cloned for the floor. And what else can we, we'll select that material again. I don't know if we can, let me just hold Option, or if I can get in here and disconnect, right click, reset value. Yeah, okay, so I can reset the values on these, right click, reset value, and then I can give it a diffuse color. We'll just go back to sort of that orange and turn down metallic, and roughness is pretty good there. Turn off clear coat, we don't need that. Yeah, and that's basically what how I would expect it to respond. So this looks pretty good. curious if I turn emissive color up, if it's going to give me global illumination with the floor. Not sure. I'm not sure if that's illuminating or if I'm just getting reflections on the feet, maybe. I don't know. We'll just turn that back to black. I think it might be illuminating, but I don't know that there's a way to scale it, either based on the size of the emitter, the plane, or just a power factor like you would in something like Octane. At any rate, you know, again, it's not a full-blown DCC, but it's pretty shocking what you can do in here. So you can manipulate textures and copy textures and assign textures. And I assume you should, you know, I should be able to just, again, duplicate the robot. So I'm just going to hold Option. Again, my Mac foo is not so great. I'm just going to move it over here. I'm going to press E to rotate. E, yeah, isn't E rotate? Oh no, I have to do Option E, right? So again, it's Maya, but pressing the Option. And then Option W, and just grab the planar handle and move them over here. Yeah, man, let's just Option R to scale, move them down a little bit. So, you know, we just updated this robot scene, right? So that's a little bit of the basics. Now, look, we can also do things like with this robot here, we can go over here to Tools and 3D Manipulator. We can adjust the pivot. Let's put it in the middle. Put the pivot in the middle, so that's kind of cool. We can move the pivot. And again, like there's sort of a just like, and go to my select tool here and just click and select this robot. Can I? Can I just click and select the robot? Maybe it's trying to get, yeah, it's trying to get the scene selection. So you're better off in here, I suppose. And just Option W, move down just a tad, like that. So yeah, man. So it's interesting, right? And so again, let's look at our other camera. I can go over here and select it. I can unlock it. I can maneuver this camera, zoom out a little bit, get both robots in here. I don't know that I can do depth of field in the, we just middle mouse pan down a little bit. I don't know if I can get depth of field in the renderer yet. I don't know how far they're going to take this. The fact that you can get basically what looks like a path traced HDR lit render out of preview and have control over however many cameras you want, you have control over materials, you have control over the scene, is pretty sweet. Again, now my main interest in this is just like being a USD gold standard file format checker to make sure all the other DCC programs we use can sort of all communicate on the same level with the USD file spec. But being able to do this inside of preview is crazy. And I can go in here and I could say, I can open up another scene. So let's open up our TIE fighter here. And so I've got my TIE fighter and I can look at the object hierarchy and I can select the scene here, right click and say copy. And then I'm just going to minimize this. I can go back to my robots here. Let's go back to my perspective view. And then let's go to my object hierarchy. I'm going to select scene. I'm going to right click. I'm actually going to click hold and rename this scene robot or robot. How about robot? And then I'm going to right click and say paste. And I just dropped my TIE fighter in the scene. And by some miracle, the TIE fighter wasn't a kilometer wide. Because again, you never know what you're going to get with this stuff. Click and hold to rename because it's an Apple. Why double click when you can click and hold and pray it works? Okay, fine. TIE fighter. Sorry, Apple, but you've made some weird changes over the years. All right, we've got our manipulator here. Let's just go to our mesh. And we'll just click this null at the top here. And or maybe this one right here. Again, this is from Sketchfab. I just move my TIE fighter up and forward. And Option E to rotate. Yeah, Option W again. Move it over here a little bit. What sort of options? Do I have an exposure slider? I do. Let's bring up the exposure a bit. Pretty cool, man. You can combine scenes together. And now this is the part that kind of gets me again. Like I don't use my Mac Studio that much. I use Octane and now it's available in the Mac Studio, but I have a full-blown like fire-breathing PC workstation that I use for work. And one of the sort of things that Apple did a number of years ago to make everybody's life worse, when I guess they thought it was making it easier, is to auto-save everything. And so this whole file is been saved. If I just, I don't actually have to save it. If I just close this guy, I could be wrong. We're going to test. I think it just saves it like this. And so if I close it without saving it, and I'm just going to quick look toys. Yeah, there it is, right? Now it's not you're not seeing the HDR and everything because it's not using the ray tracer and quick look. But if I double click this and bring it back up in my renderer, and I go over here and I select, you know, the ray tracer and go back over to my saved camera view. So let me let this initialize. And so there we go. Let's just take a look at my cameras. Let's take a look at this one here. And I'm just going to click on the high quality button. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Although it does look like the camera's pushed in a little more maybe than it used to be. Let me just sort of unlock this and push out a little bit. Pan over. So, you know, you got to be careful because if you load up one of your USD scenes and you, I don't know, look through a camera and move it a little bit, you just saved your scene. And that is a huge no-no in any sort of pipeline. And I don't know, this is how Preview works. I don't know if the group that implemented this awesome USD editor can change that. Because God knows how many layers there are at Apple saying, oh, this is how Apple works now or whatever. Now, you can go in here and say, revert to, browse all versions, and you have a sort of, you have this sort of versioning system built into Apple. So I just have all these versions here, right? And so I can revert to this version. I can click here and revert to that version, which is cool. I'm not going to do it because I like what I've done here. But that's how Preview works, and so you got to be careful. But I'm just going to kind of recap this. Like, you can check all these scenes via quick look, right? And then you can go into Preview, and you can view your USD scene file, right? Option click to put down the TIE Fighter here. Let's just grab we can grab like the TIE Fighter cockpit and, Option W for transform and just move the cockpit up. Right, we can transform around in our scene. We can change the lighting. We can rename stuff. We can reparent things. I believe I should just be able to you can just drag and drop. Can you drag and drop parent? Yes, you can. Okay, I'm going to undo that. And I'm going to undo my cockpit maneuver. But yeah, you can manipulate the scene file in Preview, which is fascinating. So I'm gonna test this real quick. I'm gonna open this in Blender and Cinema 4D. That's what I have on this computer, and let's just see, how this works. So I'm gonna just file, open. Actually, I want to do a merge. File open actually might work fine. We'll just do a merge. We'll merge. And we'll go to our robot toys and hit open. And we're just gonna hit OK. And yeah, man, there it is, right? Now, like I said, there is like an annotation node, but there's no, if you remember, I wrote like, make this, whatever I wrote here, make the arm red, or red. I don't see that anywhere. I see the annotation node. Now again, this could be a Cinema 4D USD spec problem, or this could be Preview not exporting that correctly to this USD file. I don't know. Like every app out there is who knows where on the USD spectrum. The idea is let's get them all on the same page using Preview as a test platform, and assuming Apple is going to keep that to standardized on the spec. So whoops, there we go in Cinema 4D. Let's check out Blender. Now, I'm not a Blender user. In fact, it was really sort of painful for me to install Blender on here. I know. I know, because I use this program, Moto, right there, and Blender kind of gave Moto the kick to the face. All right, let's check it out in Blender. We got Blender. Okay, thanks, Blender. We got a cube. Blender starts with a cube because I guess they like you to have to do that every time. Do we have import? Yep, import. And we want USD right here, universal scene description. And let's go to my desktop and let's go to downloads, and we will allow Blender to go to my download folder, I suppose. And we're going to go to the robot toy, and we're going to go import USD. Interesting. So here it is. I don't know enough about Blender to know if materials are not coming in. But I would think they would be. So let me go down the whole hierarchy here. Here's the robot. Is that a material? That is a vertex group. Okay, so there's material. Okay. Yeah, it has the base color. So obviously I'm just missing some sort of viewport option here because I don't use Blender. So I'm going to assume the materials work. And in the comments, you can tell me how dumb I am that I don't know how to view materials in Blender. Shade, smooth. Come on, is there a material somewhere? Yeah, man. Don't know how you Blender people do it, but it's all there. Can Blender alt nav? Yes, it does. Okay, cool. All right, so again, like this is just early days, but what we did is we took a USD file off of Sketchfab. We brought it into Preview. We cloned a robot, added a dome light, gave it an HDR, imported or just merged scenes with the TIE fighter, and changed some material settings on the floor, added a primitive, exported it, or just saved automatically, whether we liked it or not, because that's how Preview works. Imported into both Blender and Cinema 4D. Interesting. I don't know. I don't know where this is going to go. I don't know. It's kind of exciting. So yeah, I'll check back in on this once Golden Gate goes public, and maybe we can find out a little bit more about who's behind this and where this is going to go. All right, thanks.
Yum, yum.